Hey guys, welcome back to another peaceful journey through history. Tonight we're going to explore one of the most significant events of the medieval world, the Black Death. Picture, if you will, the Europe of the early 1300s. It's a world moving at the pace of oxen pulling wooden plows across muddy fields. The morning mist rises slowly from river valleys where water wheels turn with gentle, rhythmic splashing. In small villages scattered across the countryside, people wake with the sun, their lives following patterns established by countless generations before them. The air is cleaner than we can imagine today. On a clear morning, you might stand in a village square and hear nothing but the soft lowing of cattle, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer against an anvil, and perhaps the gentle toll of church bells marking the hours of prayer. These sounds create a peaceful soundtrack to daily life, a steady rhythm that has remained unchanged for centuries. In these villages, everyone knows everyone. The baker rises before dawn, his hands working the same dough recipes his grandfather used. The miller checks his wheel by the stream, listening to the familiar creak of wood and splash of water. Children play simple games with wooden hoops and corn-husk dolls, their laughter echoing off stone walls and thatched roofs. The medieval world operates on cycles, the cycle of seasons, the cycle of planting and harvest, the cycle of holy days and feast days. People understand their place in these greater rhythms. They plant their fields in spring, watching green shoots push up through dark soil. They tend their crops through long summer days, when the sun sets late and fireflies dance in the warm evening air. In autumn, they gather the harvest, working together in a community effort that brings neighbors side by side in the golden fields. Winter is a time for indoor crafts, spinning wool, carving wood, telling stories by the fire. These cycles give structure and meaning to life, creating a sense of security and continuity that spans generations. Trade routes connect these villages to a larger world, but slowly and peacefully. Merchants travel well-worn paths, their horse-drawn carts loaded with salt, spices, wool, and grain. They stop at inns where the same families have provided hospitality for decades. The pace is unhurried. A journey that we might complete in hours takes days or weeks, allowing time for conversation, for rest, for observing the gradual changes in landscape and custom. Sometime around 1347, in the bustling port cities of the Mediterranean, something began to change. But change, in the medieval world, comes slowly, like the turning of seasons. At first, it was just whispers among traders, stories from distant lands that seemed as remote as fairy tales to most people. Imagine the port of Caffa on the Black Sea, where merchants from Venice and Genoa established trading posts. The harbor is busy with ships, their tall masts swaying gently in the sea breeze, their holds filled with silk and spices from the far reaches of Asia. The sound of waves lapping against wooden hulls creates a constant, soothing rhythm. Seagulls call overhead, and the air smells of salt and tar and distant, exotic places. But among these normal sounds and smells, there are troubling reports. Traders speak of strange illnesses in the east, of cities where people have fallen sick in numbers too large to count. These stories seem distant and unreal to people whose world extends perhaps 20 miles from their birthplace. They're like stories of dragons or distant kingdoms, interesting perhaps, but not immediately concerning. The plague, historians believe, began its long journey westward along the Silk Road, that ancient network of trade routes connecting east and west. Picture this road not as a single path, but as a web of trails winding through mountains and deserts, connecting oasis towns and market cities. Caravans move slowly along these routes, camels plodding steadily across sand dunes, their bells creating a gentle, rhythmic chiming that carries across the vast, quiet landscape. At night, these travelers camp under stars brighter than any we see today. They build small fires and share stories, bread and water. The desert is silent except for the soft sound of wind across the dunes and the occasional call of a night bird. It's a peaceful, timeless scene, but one that, unknown to the travelers, carries the seeds of tremendous change. When the plague first reached European shores, it didn't announce itself with drama or fanfare. Like most significant changes in the medieval world, it arrived quietly, almost imperceptibly. Picture a trading ship entering the harbor at Messina, in Sicily, on an autumn day in 1347. The water is calm, reflecting the golden light of the late afternoon sun. The ship moves slowly, pushed by gentle winds, its sails full and white against the blue sky. From the shore, it looks like any other trading vessel returning from the east. The townspeople who gather to watch its approach see nothing unusual, just another link in the chain of commerce that connects their small world to distant places. Children run along the waterfront, excited by the prospect of exotic goods and stories from far away. But as the ship draws closer, something seems wrong. There are too few sailors on deck. The ship moves sluggishly, as if barely under control. When it finally reaches the harbor, the truth becomes apparent. Many of the crew are sick, and some have died during the long voyage home. Even then, the response is measured and careful, following established customs for dealing with illness. Sick sailors are taken to places of care. The ship's cargo is unloaded slowly, with precautions. Local physicians trained in the medieval understanding of disease examine the patients and consult their texts and their experience. Medieval medicine operates on principles very different from our own, but it's not without wisdom. Doctors understand the importance of rest, clean air, and proper diet. They observe their patients carefully, noting symptoms and trying remedies that have been passed down through generations. They work by candlelight and firelight, their treatments gentle and thoughtful. In monasteries and convents, monks and nuns who have devoted their lives to caring for the sick prepare herbal remedies and offer comfort to those who are suffering. Their infirmaries are quiet places with stone walls that stay cool in summer and hold warmth in winter. The air smells of herbs and healing oils. Patients rest on simple beds covered with woolen blankets, while their caregivers move softly between them, offering water, food, and gentle words of comfort. As autumn turns to winter in 1347, reports of the strange illness begin to spread from port to port along the Mediterranean coast. But news travels slowly in the medieval world, carried by merchants and pilgrims who stop at inns and tell their stories to other travelers around the fire. Picture these medieval inns, low stone buildings with thick walls and small windows. Inside, a fire burns in a large hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The air is warm and smoky, filled with the scent of roasting meat and ale. Travelers sit on wooden benches, sharing their bread and stories. The conversation flows slowly, interrupted by long, comfortable silences. When merchants speak of the illness they have seen in distant ports, their voices are low and thoughtful. They describe symptoms carefully, trying to make sense of what they've witnessed. Their listeners nod and ask questions, but there's no panic, no urgent need to spread the word quickly. Information travels at the same pace as everything else in this world, gradually, thoughtfully, with time for reflection. In the cities that winter, life continues much as it always has. In Florence, artisans work in their shops, creating beautiful objects with patient skill. The sound of chisels on stone, of hammers shaping metal, of looms weaving cloth creates a gentle industrial symphony. These craftsmen have learned their trades over years of apprenticeship, and they work with the confidence that comes from deep knowledge and steady practice. The workshops are filled with the good smells of wood shavings, leather, and dyes. Sunlight slants through small windows, illuminating particles of dust dancing in the air. Apprentices sweep floors and tend fires, learning by watching and slowly, gradually taking on more responsibility. In the countryside, winter follows its ancient patterns. Fields lie dormant under frost, their soil resting and renewing itself for spring planting. Farmers tend their animals, making sure they have enough hay and grain to last until warm weather returns. Children help with simple tasks, gathering eggs, feeding chickens, carrying water. In the evenings, families gather around their fires. Someone might read aloud from a religious text or tell stories passed down through generations. Women spin wool or mend clothes by the firelight. Men might work on simple wooden tools or repairs. The pace is unhurried, comfortable, creating a sense of security and continuity. Spring arrives in 1348, as it always has, with the gradual warming of the earth and the slow emergence of green shoots in fields and gardens. But this spring carries something new, the continuation of the strange illness that began in the port cities and is now spreading slowly inland. Picture the Italian countryside in early spring. The hills are covered with the soft green haze as new grass begins to grow. Wildflowers bloom in meadows, small, delicate blossoms in white and yellow and pale blue. Apple and cherry trees burst into bloom, their branches heavy with fragrant flowers that attract humming bees. In this beautiful setting, people begin to notice changes. In some villages, more people than usual are falling ill. The symptoms are distinctive: high fever, painful swellings, dark spots on the skin. Local healers try their traditional remedies, preparing teas from herbs gathered in the hills, applying poultices, and offering the comfort of their presence and experience. The village church becomes a center of activity, not just for worship, but for community support. People gather to pray together, finding comfort in familiar rituals and shared faith. The priest offers not just spiritual guidance, but practical help, organizing care for the sick and ensuring that no one is forgotten or neglected. In the monasteries that dot the countryside, monks respond to the crisis with characteristic calm and purpose. They have always seen caring for the sick as part of their calling, and they approach this new challenge with the same steady dedication they bring to their prayers and their work. Picture a monastery infirmary in the spring of 1348. It's a long, narrow room with stone walls and small windows that let in soft, natural light. The beds are simple but clean, each covered with rough linen and woolen blankets. The air is quiet except for the soft sounds of breathing and the gentle footsteps of the monks as they move from patient to patient. Brother Infirmarian, trained in the medical knowledge of his time, examines each patient carefully. He checks pulses, observes symptoms, and prescribes treatments based on centuries of accumulated wisdom. His movements are calm and deliberate, his voice gentle as he speaks words of comfort to those in his care. As the illness spreads through the spring and summer of 1348, communities develop their own rhythms of response. These aren't the rapid, coordinated efforts we might expect today, but rather the measured, thoughtful approaches that characterize medieval life. In larger cities like Florence and Siena, wealthy merchants and civic leaders organize relief efforts. They establish hospitals and hire additional physicians. They arrange for food to be distributed to families who can't work because of illness. These efforts unfold slowly and carefully, with much discussion and planning. Picture a meeting of city councilors in a stone chamber lit by candles and oil lamps. The men sit around a long wooden table, speaking in low, serious voices about the challenges facing their community. Outside, the summer evening is warm and quiet, with the scent of blooming flowers drifting through the open windows. The discussion is thorough and thoughtful. How many people are sick? What resources are available? How can they best help their citizens? The decisions they make will unfold over weeks and months, implemented with the same steady persistence that characterizes all medieval endeavors. In rural areas, the response is even more personal and immediate. When the miller falls ill, his neighbors take turns operating his mill, ensuring that grain continues to be ground into flour. When a farming family is affected, other families help tend their crops and animals. These acts of mutual support happen naturally, without formal organization, as part of the deep community bonds that hold medieval society together. Picture a summer evening in a small village. The sun is setting behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. In the village square, neighbors gather to discuss who needs help and how they can provide it. Children play quietly nearby, while adults make plans and commitments. The conversation is gentle and practical, focused on immediate needs and simple solutions. One of the most remarkable aspects of the medieval response to the plague is the way communities developed a kind of wisdom about living with uncertainty and loss. This wasn't resignation or despair, but rather a deep understanding that life contains both joy and sorrow, and that both must be accepted with grace. In the great cathedral cities, this wisdom is reflected in the continued work on massive building projects that had been underway for generations. The construction of Notre Dame in Paris, begun in 1163, continues throughout the plague years. Stonemasons and carpenters, many of whom have lost family members to the disease, still report to work each day, adding their small contributions to a project they know they may not live to see completed. Picture these craftsmen at work on a summer morning in 1349. The sun slants through the high windows of the unfinished cathedral, illuminating the dust that rises from their chisels and saws. The sound of their work, the tap of hammers, the scrape of stone on stone, the creak of ropes and pulleys, creates a peaceful, rhythmic soundtrack. Each worker focuses on his immediate task, carving a capital, setting a stone, fitting a wooden beam. They work with the patience that comes from understanding that great things are built slowly, one small piece at a time. The knowledge that some of their number may not survive to see the project completed doesn't make them work with frantic urgency, but rather with a kind of reverent attention to the quality and beauty of each individual contribution. In the countryside, farmers continue to plant and harvest, knowing that some fields may be left untended and some crops may go ungathered. But the rhythm of the seasons continues, and those who are able respond to its demands with steady persistence. Picture a harvest scene from the autumn of 1349. The golden grain waves in the breeze, ready for cutting. Some fields stand empty, their owners too sick to work or too few in number to manage the harvest. But in other fields, neighbors work together, their scythes moving in steady rhythm as they cut the grain. The work is harder than usual, with fewer hands available, but it continues with the same careful attention to quality and thoroughness that has characterized farming for centuries. Throughout the plague years, people find ways to record and remember their experiences, not with the frantic urgency of crisis, but with the thoughtful deliberation of those who understand the importance of preserving memory for future generations. Chronicles and records from this period reveal a remarkable attention to detail and a desire to understand and explain what is happening. Writers work by candlelight in monastery scriptoriums, carefully forming each letter with quill pens, creating documents that will survive for centuries. Picture Brother Chronicler in his cell, working on the record of his monastery's experience with the plague. His desk is simple, a wooden surface with his parchment, his inkwell, and his quills. The only light comes from a single candle, its flame flickering slightly in the draft from the window. Outside, the night is quiet, except for the sound of rain on stone and the distant tolling of the bell that marks the hours of prayer. He writes slowly and carefully, choosing each word with precision. He records not just the facts of illness and death, but also the acts of courage and kindness he has witnessed. Monks who continue to care for the sick despite their own fear. Townspeople who shared their food with neighbors. Families who opened their homes to orphan children. Artists, too, respond to the plague with their characteristic patience and skill. Painters working on church frescoes incorporate themes of mortality and redemption, but they do so with the same careful attention to beauty and meaning that has always characterized their work. Picture a painter at work on a church wall in the autumn of 1349. He stands on wooden scaffolding, his palette of pigments arranged carefully beside him. The colors are rich and deep, ultramarine blue ground from precious stones, gold leaf that catches and reflects the light, earth tones mixed from clay and minerals. He works on a section of the fresco that depicts angels caring for the souls of the departed. His brush moves slowly and deliberately, building up layers of color to create figures that seem to glow with inner light. The work requires intense concentration, but there's also a meditative quality to the process, a sense of participating in something larger and more enduring than individual life. Throughout the plague years, countless individuals respond to crisis with quiet heroism. Not the dramatic gestures of legend, but the steady, persistent acts of care and duty that keep communities functioning. Physicians trained in medieval medicine continue to visit their patients, even when they know their treatments may not be effective. They carry their knowledge carefully, in leather-bound books and in memories trained by years of study. When they examine a patient, they do so with gentle thoroughness, checking pulses, observing breathing, asking careful questions about symptoms. Picture Dr. Magistralis making his rounds in a plague-affected town. He carries a leather bag containing his instruments, simple tools for examination and treatment. His movements are calm and professional as he moves from house to house. In each home, he spends time not just examining the sick, but also speaking with family members, offering advice about care and comfort. His treatments are based on the medical knowledge of his time: herbal remedies, bloodletting, prayers, and the careful regulation of diet and environment. While these may seem primitive by modern standards, they represent the best understanding available, applied with skill and compassion. Priests and nuns continue their work of spiritual care, offering last rites to the dying and comfort to the grieving. They approach this work not with grim resignation, but with a sense of sacred purpose, understanding their role as bridges between the earthly and the divine. Picture Sister Marguerite in a convent infirmary, sitting beside the bed of a young woman who is dying. The room is quiet, except for the soft sound of breathing and the distant chanting of the other nuns at their evening prayers. Sister Marguerite holds the woman's hand gently, speaking words of comfort and hope in a voice barely above a whisper. Her presence is more important than any words she might say. She represents continuity, faith, and the assurance that no one dies alone or forgotten. When the young woman draws her last breath, Sister Marguerite remains with her for a few moments, offering a prayer and gently closing her eyes before going to inform the family and arrange for proper burial. One of the most remarkable aspects of life during the plague years is the way people continue to create and appreciate beauty, even in the midst of suffering and loss. This isn't denial or escape, but rather a deep understanding that beauty and meaning persist even in the darkest times. In the great libraries of monasteries and universities, scribes continue their patient work of copying manuscripts. Each page represents hours of careful labor, the preparation of parchment, the mixing of inks, the precise formation of each letter. Illuminators add decorative elements with painstaking attention to detail, golden initials that catch the light, marginal drawings of flowers and animals, complex geometric patterns that seem to vibrate with life. Picture Brother Scriptor at his desk in the monastery library. The room is filled with the gentle sounds of scholarship, the scratch of quills on parchment, the soft turning of pages, the whispered discussions of scholarly points. Sunlight streams through tall windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air and casting warm rectangles of light on the wooden reading desks. He works on a copy of Augustine's City of God, a text that seems particularly relevant in these troubled times. Each letter is formed with careful precision, each word considered for its weight and meaning. The work requires complete attention, creating a kind of meditation that lifts the mind above immediate concerns and connects it to eternal truths. Musicians, too, continue their art. In churches, chant rises in the same ancient patterns, its mathematical precision creating harmony that seems to touch something beyond earthly experience. The human voice, unaccompanied by instruments, creates pure sound that fills stone spaces and lifts the heart. Picture the monks of a Benedictine abbey gathered in their choir stalls for the evening office. The church is lit only by candles, their flames creating pools of warm light in the vast stone space. The chant begins slowly, with the cantor intoning the opening phrase, then builds as all the voices join in, creating harmonies that seem to emerge naturally from the architecture itself. The sound is both earthly and transcendent, grounded in human breath and vocal cords, but reaching towards something infinite. Each monk contributes his voice to the whole, individual identity dissolving into communal expression of faith and hope. As the most intense phase of the plague begins to wane in many areas by 1351, communities slowly begin the long process of rebuilding and renewal. This isn't a sudden return to normal, but rather the gradual emergence of new patterns of life adapted to changed circumstances. Villages that lost many residents consolidate their remaining population, sometimes abandoning outlying farms and houses to focus resources on areas that can still be effectively maintained. This process unfolds slowly, with careful consideration of which buildings can be maintained, which fields can still be worked, which crafts and trades can continue with reduced numbers. Picture a village council meeting in the winter of 1351. The gathered men represent perhaps half the households that existed before the plague, but they approach their deliberations with the same careful attention to community needs that has always characterized local governance. They discuss practical matters, which roads to maintain, which fields to plant in spring, how to organize the remaining craftsmen to meet essential needs. The decisions they make will shape their community for generations, but they make them with patience and thorough discussion, understanding that hasty choices often lead to problems later. In cities, guilds reorganize themselves to function with reduced membership. Master craftsmen take on more apprentices than usual, accelerating training programs to replace lost skills. These efforts require careful planning and patient instruction, but they represent hope for continuity and renewal. Picture Master Giovanni in his goldsmith shop in Florence, working with 3 new apprentices instead of his usual one. The workshop is filled with the gentle sounds of metalworking, the tap of small hammers, the hiss of soldering irons, the scratch of files and burnishers. Each apprentice watches carefully as the master demonstrates techniques, trying to absorb in months what normally requires years to learn. The work continues with the same attention to quality and beauty that has always characterized the craft. Each piece, whether a simple ring or an elaborate chalice, receives the same careful attention to detail, the same patient pursuit of perfection. The knowledge that fewer hands are available to do the work doesn't lead to shortcuts or reduced standards, but rather to a deeper appreciation of the value and importance of each individual effort. By the mid-1350s, European society has begun to establish a new equilibrium, not a return to pre-plague conditions, but rather a different way of organizing life that takes into account changed circumstances. This adaptation happens gradually, with the same patient persistence that characterizes all medieval change. Land that once supported dense populations is allowed to return to forest and meadow. These abandoned areas become havens for wildlife, creating a kind of accidental wilderness that provides resources for hunting and gathering. Villages become more self-sufficient, developing skills and crafts that were previously obtained through trade. Picture a former agricultural valley that is slowly returning to nature. Where once there were fields of grain, wildflowers now bloom in profusion. Fruit trees from abandoned orchards still produce their harvest, now gathered by deer and birds rather than human hands. The ruins of a small church stand surrounded by saplings and vines, creating a peaceful memorial to the community that once thrived here. The scene is not melancholy but rather peaceful, suggesting the resilience of nature and the cycles of growth and renewal that govern all life. Travelers passing through such areas often stop to rest in the shade of these recovering forests, finding in them a kind of natural sanctuary that speaks to something deep and enduring. In surviving communities, social relationships adapt to new realities. With reduced populations, the sharp hierarchies of earlier times give way to more collaborative arrangements. Peasants who survive find themselves with more land available and greater bargaining power with landlords. Craftsmen discover new opportunities as competition decreases and demand for their skills increases. These changes don't happen suddenly or dramatically, but rather emerge gradually through countless individual decisions and negotiations. A peasant family finds that their lord is willing to accept lower rents in exchange for their continued presence on his lands. A craftsman discovers that he can charge higher prices for his work and choose his customers more selectively. Perhaps most importantly, the communities that survive the plague develop new forms of wisdom about living with uncertainty and appreciating the present moment. This isn't fatalism or despair, but rather a deeper understanding of the preciousness and fragility of life. People invest more energy in relationships, understanding that time with loved ones is limited and valuable. Families gather more frequently, sharing meals and stories with greater appreciation for each other's presence. Communities develop stronger mutual support networks, understanding that they depend on each other for survival and flourishing. Picture a Sunday afternoon in a village that has survived the plague. Families gather in the square after church, children playing while adults talk quietly in small groups. The conversation is relaxed and pleasant, focused on immediate concerns and simple pleasures. There's a quality of attention and presence that comes from having faced mortality directly and emerged with renewed appreciation for life's basic gifts. The church service that morning was attended by perhaps half the number of people who once filled the pews. But the singing was no less beautiful, the prayers no less heartfelt. If anything, there's an increased intensity of gratitude and faith, born from having witnessed both the fragility and the resilience of human community. Religious art and literature from this period reflects this new wisdom. Paintings of the Madonna show increased tenderness and intimacy. Poetry focuses more on the beauty of ordinary moments, a sunrise, a child's laughter, the taste of bread and wine. These works don't deny the reality of suffering and death, but rather place them in a larger context of meaning and hope. By 1360, a new generation is growing up. Children who were born during or after the plague years, and who take the changed world as normal. For them, the smaller populations, the abandoned villages, the altered social relationships are simply the way things are, not a departure from some previous norm. These children play in the ruins of old settlements, finding in them not symbols of loss, but simply part of the landscape of their world. They explore abandoned churches and houses with the same curious interest that children have always brought to their investigations. For them, these places are not haunted by memory, but filled with possibility. Picture a group of children exploring the remains of a monastery that was abandoned during the plague years. They run through the empty cloisters, their voices echoing off stone walls. They find treasures in the ruins, pieces of colored glass from broken windows, carved stones from fallen arches, fragments of books left behind by the monks. Their play is joyful and innocent, transforming a site of loss into a place of imagination and discovery. They create games and stories from what they find, weaving new meanings from the remnants of the old. In their play, we can see the beginning of recovery, not a return to what was, but the creation of something new from what remains. The world they inherit is in many ways better than the one that existed before the plague. With smaller populations, there is less pressure on resources. People have more land, more opportunity, more choice in how they live their lives. The rigid social hierarchies of the earlier period have loosened, creating more mobility and flexibility. Trade networks, disrupted during the worst years of the plague, gradually rebuild themselves, but often along different lines. New routes emerge, new partnerships form, new products and ideas flow along paths that might not have developed in the old system. As we reach the end of our journey through this transformative period, it's worth noting how much remained constant throughout the years of plague. The sun continued to rise and set. The seasons continued their ancient cycle. Seeds continued to sprout, and flowers continued to bloom. In the countryside, the basic rhythms of agricultural life persisted. Surviving farmers still planted their fields in spring, tended their crops through summer, and harvested in autumn. The work was harder, with fewer hands available, but the essential patterns remained the same. In cities, markets still operated, crafts still flourished, and people still gathered to worship, to celebrate, and to support each other through difficulties. The scale might have been smaller, but the fundamental human activities that create meaning and community continued. Picture a market day in a small city in 1365, 15 years after the worst of the plague. The square is busy, but not crowded, filled with stalls selling bread, cloth, pottery, and other necessities. Merchants call their wares in voices that echo off stone buildings. Children run between the stalls while their mothers examine goods and negotiate prices. The scene has a comfortable, familiar quality. These are activities that humans have engaged in for centuries, and they continue with the same blend of practical necessity and social pleasure that has always characterized market life. The people are fewer in number than they once were, but their interactions have the same warmth and vitality that have always made market centers of community life. As night falls on our exploration of this remarkable period in human history, we can rest in the knowledge that even the most challenging times reveal the fundamental resilience and goodness of human nature. The medieval response to the Black Death shows us people facing unprecedented challenges with courage, compassion, and wisdom. They cared for their sick with dedication and skill. They supported their neighbors with generosity and kindness. They continued to create beauty and meaning, even in the midst of suffering. They adapted to changed circumstances with flexibility and grace. Most importantly, They maintained their humanity and their hope even in the darkest hours. The world that emerged from the plague years was different from the one that preceded them, but it was also in many ways richer and more vibrant. Communities that survived were often stronger and more cohesive. Individuals who lived through the crisis often had a deeper appreciation for life and relationships. The arts and literature of the later 14th century show a new intensity and beauty born from direct encounter with mortality and renewal. As you drift off to sleep tonight, let yourself be comforted by the knowledge that humans have always found ways to endure and flourish, even in the most difficult circumstances. The medieval people we've met in our journey faced challenges as great as any in human history, yet they responded with dignity, creativity, and hope. Their story reminds us that resilience is not about avoiding difficulty, but about finding meaning and purpose within it. It's about continuing to care for each other, to create beauty, to seek truth, and to build community even when the future is uncertain. The church bells that rang out over medieval Europe during the plague years called people not just to prayer, but to continued participation in the great human enterprise of creating meaning and hope in the face of uncertainty. Those bells still ring in our hearts, calling us to the same courage and compassion that carried our ancestors through their darkest and brightest hours. Rest well, knowing that you are part of a long, continuous story of human resilience and renewal. Like the medieval communities we've visited tonight, we too can find ways to transform challenge into opportunity, loss into wisdom, and uncertainty into hope. Sweet dreams, and may you wake refreshed and inspired by the quiet heroism of ordinary people doing extraordinary things in their own time and place, just as you do in yours. The story continues, as gentle and persistent as the turning of seasons, as reliable as the rise and fall of breath, as eternal as the human capacity for love and hope in every age. Sleep well,